All right, so I'm going to run you quickly through the points that we discussed in our Dorado Snow School this evening. So, first, we looked at the skeleton of the horse, and I pointed out the specific structures that they have that are going to tell us a lot about how their bodies are developing. So, the spine of the horse is really crucial. And as we train our eye, as we work with our horses, we're able to see what the spine is doing, even under the layers of skin and muscle and tendons. So what I want to look at is the thoracic vertebrae. So that's the part of the back that we sit on. And all those thoracic vertebrae are attached to the ribs. They have those finger-like processes sticking up. Those are called the spinous processes. And there's space in between them. And then underneath where they all connect, it looks more like a straight line. That's where the vertebrae are. And there is synovial fluid in between them that helps with gliding so that you're not getting bone on bone. Now, what can happen is if a horse is not developed correctly and they're contracting and compressing their back instead of elongating it, they can end up with bone getting rubbed on bone. And that's where we get kissing spine. If we look at the cervical vertebra, which are really important, it's a little harder to see because there are no processes, but you can see, you kind of have the curve and then it flattens out and starts a new curve. Those are all the cervical vertebra, and they too have the fluid in between. And then at the very top where the skull meets the cervical vertebrae, we have the AO joint. And that's really crucial in everything that we do when we ride and when we train. And we're going to see a little bit of the use of that joint in rotation and how that helps express the horse's emotions and thoughts with the way they rotate their head and where their eye is looking. The reason I like to look at the skeleton first is it's important to know what structures are causing these movements in the horse. And as we go into more detail with communication and training, we'll be able to see more of the impact of the skeletal and muscular systems on the horse overall. So for this, I just love this picture because a lot of the classical masters talk about how we really are becoming one with the horse. Our spine is meshing into their spine. And everything we do when we ride, we're getting so much communication through the horse, through their spine, and into our pelvis and into our spine itself. So I think this is just such a cool picture of our skeleton on their skeleton. We have the same things. We have the thoracic vertebra. We have the synovial fluid in between. Our thoracic vertebra are attached to our ribs. All of it is very, very similar. So what we do with our body in the saddle, the horse can mirror. They can feel those changes in those spots in our body. So that's something we'll be talking about at another date, but I think it's a beautiful thing to mention, at least at the beginning of a conversation on communication with our horses. So this slide, I'm just going to let you guys watch through it because I talk through what's going on. I'm very specific with my haltering and my bridling, and a lot of it is to ask for the horse to be elongated through the spine. So basically to create more space in between those vertebrae instead of compressing. A lot of the way people put halters and bridles on, it pushes into the horse's face, which is going to take the skull and compress it into the cervical vertebra. So that skull, where it meets the cervical vertebra, that AO joint, is going to push into it. It's going to create tension and compression. So now you're starting off your session with your horse with tension and compression in the spine, instead of relaxation and elongation, which is what we want. So I'll show you a way that we can work through those issues and how the horse is communicating that there could be tension there, that there could be no, that they need to tell us no. The important thing with understanding a no from a horse is that no communication is them advocating for something that they need. So in this case, this horse is saying, I'm tight somewhere, and I can't put my bridle on correctly right now. So because she has a basic groundwork foundation and can stand and work through all of those things, it's not a big deal. Now, if this was a horse that didn't know all those things, that would be problematic. We would have to go about this a very, very different way. And I would probably have to be a little bit more hands-on and have more pressure involved in this process. But this horse is capable of doing this herself. So let's watch what ends up happening.
I just took the cross ties off after saddling. We're triangling a new saddle, so it's even more important for me to see what her body language is. Also important to notice her stature may look slightly different today because we're at almost 6 weeks with her feet when normally we go about 5. With Christmas, we ended up having to push back a week longer. So I see that there is definitely a little bit more of a difference in her weight distribution. But as soon as I took those cross ties off, she looked away. So I stopped. That's a very clear sign that a horse is saying no to something. So when one of my horses does that, when I am getting them ready, I take the cross ties off and it's time for the bridle, they all know how to stand. There we go. If they look away, I give them a moment. Okay, we're shifting. Now we're looking. All right, so reinforcement. So that's a bridge cue, and the kind of sort of clucking noise. And then a treat in the neutral zone once she looks at me. So we're reinforcing the behavior. Good girl. Because we want to make bridling a pleasant experience. We want to start off with positivity and yes behavior instead of no behavior. Hi, honey. Good girl. So let's see if I can prop this up. All right. Hold on, I'm going to switch it. All right. So now we're interactive and responding, whereas before she was really zoned out. So that's really important to watching your horse because if we start with no, we're going to end up with a fight for the whole session. It's not worth it. So with my horses, they all know how to put their head into their bridle. So even when I bring my reins up, I'm watching to see what does she do. Does she come to me? Does she put her head down into them? She didn't do a ton there. So I'm going to have to watch that as I take my halter off. All my horses release the pole when we put halters on, when we take them off. Good girl. Nice and soft and forward and down. Okay, so now this is where things get more interesting. So on a good day, when she's saying yes, she's going to put her head in and pick up the bit herself. Now she's tucking. She's tucking back, which I know is her norm, and I can feel the tension in her jaw and in her pole. She's looking to see if there's a treat in my hand, which there's not. So I'm just going to ask for a little bit forward and down like I did with the halter. Now I feel that she's kind of slightly turned away from me with the head. Now she's turned toward me. Good girl. Now she's willing to pick it up. Good girl. Now, if a horse doesn't want to pick it up, that means there's tension in their body somewhere. And that's where I start to do stretches, very specific stretches. So that's something for another video. But it's important to watch all those body language cues as you're getting a horse ready.
Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the horse's physical makeup before we saw this video is that this horse, if I had pushed her through this with pressure instead of positive reinforcement, she would have braced on the right side of her pole and she would not have properly rotated that AO joint with her ear and her nose horizontally in alignment as she turned. So for me, this horse has been really helpful to be able to see when to use positive reinforcement and when it might be more appropriate to use a little bit of pressure. And it's a give and a take. Everybody has different opinions on how and when to do these things. But for this horse, this has worked very, very well for her to be engaged in using her body correctly. So as we think about what we saw in this video, what the head did, what the eye did, and then as she started to say yes behavior and she was turning with balance through her head and her neck, let's look at the next video of a horse that just had come back to us. He'd been out on lease. He had Lyme disease. he went to a trainer's for a little bit after a few weeks of Lyme treatment, I think, to get some work put on him to bring him back, and hopefully get some Western foundational skills, and then came back to us, and he was in a totally new environment, and I think that really whacked him out. So we don't really know why this behavior developed, but it did. And so let's watch that video and see what he's telling us.
Here.
So it's really simple here to say he's being aggressive, putting his ears back, and it's not totally untrue. But if you watch closely, he's actually being more defensive than anything else. And sometimes an aggressive horse is being defensive. Sometimes they're not. I would think the majority of the time there's some sort of fear, and so they're trying to protect themselves. That's very much the case here. And you can see as my daughter walks by, he starts by pinning his ears back and getting a little snake-like in his movement, almost like he wants to strike. But then very quickly it changes to, maybe I don't need to be afraid of you, and maybe you're going to give me attention, and maybe you can love me. And you can just see he's a little worried. He's not sure what's going to happen. So he is dealing with a few different emotions here and trying to decide what the overall choice should be. And so this is something we're helping him work through now that he's back with us. Clearly a confidence issue, could be a physical discomfort issue. We're working through all of that. But it's important to notice that just because a horse is doing one thing doesn't mean it's that simple. In this case, this horse is saying multiple things at the same time. I will be aggressive if you give me a reason to. I'm nervous around you. I'm not sure what to expect, but I want love, and I'm not sure if you're going to give me love or not. So it's good to have guidelines, but it's not that simple. All right, so first, I want to point out this mare came to us with a BCS of 2, which may have been a little generous. She has taken a long time to put the weight on. She's finally getting pretty close to where I want her to be. This was from a couple months ago, I think. And so, yeah, she's had a few things she's had to get treated for, switching some feet around to make sure that she's putting the weight on. But I like this picture of her because it tells us a lot about the nuances of equine body language. So, for example, some of my kiddos looked at this picture and they said, oh, she's paying attention to you. Her ears are up. She's looking for something. She's engaged in her environment. And completely understand why they said all of those things. Because if you just look at the head and the ears, you might think that, for sure. But if you look closer at the eye, you're going to see, in the nostril, you're going to see something different. So the eye is very worried. It has that triangular shape. It's not open equally on every area, which is what creates that triangle. The nostril is open and tense. Her eye is glazed over. This is not a horse that wants to engage. This is a horse that wants to hide. And so it's taken her a while to come out of her shell. She's starting to engage more and want to be around people more and has a lot more of a personality. It's really cool to see her come out of her shell. But it would be very easy for somebody to say this is an attentive horse when this is actually a horse that's trying to hide inside itself. And a lot of horses protect themselves by shutting their brain off from the outside world. Even if they do exactly what you say, doesn't mean they're present for it. And that is the definition of anxiety, is that their brain is stuck in the past. They might do everything you're asking in the present, but their brain is stuck in the past. And that's what's going on here. Now, all my students know that I am not a fan of two mares putting their heads together when they are being worked. And for understandable reasons, mares tend to like their space, and they might bite or they might spin and they kick, and it's not a good thing. So in this case, I'm riding Maggie on the left, and my daughter is riding Fiesta on the right, and I'm ponying her. I watched this very closely to make sure nothing bad was going to happen. And I was very surprised by the body language because I expected Maggie, a dominant mare, to tell Fiesta to get out of her space, and she did not. And they enjoyed being in each other's company, snuggling. So the reason that we can tell that they are not going to go off on each other is we've got three main indicators. The eyes are big indicators. So if you look at their eyes, they're soft and open. So if a horse is worried, you're going to have that triangular eye, whereas Maggie has that more rounded eye. Sorry, my drawing is terrible. And then Fiesta in general has a little bit more of an almond-shaped eye. So she's got a little bit less of a curve to it, but it's still open. It's not triangular and worried. Now the mouth and the jaw, they're nice and relaxed. They don't have any tension in the cheeks, biting on the bit, nice and soft. And then you can't see Maggie's ears in this picture, but you can see Fiesta's. And Fiesta's are up and just paying attention to what's going on, not alert, not back. They're just kind of up in there and happy. So it would be very easy to say, ooh, no, with this situation, but I let them snuggle because they were showing signs that they wanted to snuggle and be in each other's presence, and that was okay. Okay, so this mare, she had gone off for sale, and we don't know what happened, but something didn't go right, and she lost about 200 or so pounds. So I went to pick her up, brought her home, and said, no, she's not leaving. So when she came back, she was pretty anxious. We were just going to go in the ring and do a little bit of lunging work, and she couldn't handle that. She was just too anxious. Not anything bad, but just very zoned out. I didn't want to look at me. Head didn't want to turn toward me. Just kind of braced through her body and clearly mentally not there. So we walked right out of the ring and went and munched on some grass. When, especially this horse, but every horse, is tense, it's much harder for them to be balanced. And that was very much the case for her that day. She could not be balanced because she was anxious. I think we were maybe in the ring for a minute before I left because I knew we just weren't going to have success if we tried to fight through it. So just watch her head, her eye, and especially her legs. And what does her body do as she munches on the grass and kind of processes through everything. Okay, so hopefully you noticed the worried triangular eye. Looking around, I kind of glazed over, not really wanting to pay attention to me. With time, before this, she was really unbalanced and she wasn't even close to square. And with time, as she munched on the grass, I don't remember how long we had been munching at this point, but it had been a little bit. She started to square up those legs, at least get them kind of more in a rectangle, I guess, in this case, a trapezoid. So that was progress for her. And that is the big thing that I watched for as she was grazing, is I wanted to see, was she able to bring her body more underneath her? And then eventually as she took, a couple big deep breaths and relaxed, we were able to go back in the ring and do a little bit. But I think we went in and out a couple of times and did this to help bring her anxiety levels down. And then we had a pretty wonderful session after that. She was learning to give me her eye and actually turn and check in with me as she went. And I'll see if I can find a picture of that to include in the presentation as well. So this picture was soon after the session that I had done where she got to graze a fair amount. Obviously, she had put on some weight by this time, so maybe a few weeks after. We had also gone to a clinic with a classical Portuguese trainer to work on some groundwork to help with elongating the body. But we had been implementing one of her suggestions of a small circle with starts and stops on the wall. My ground poles are my wall there, my elevated ones. And checking in with the balance of the horse on the wall. And then either backing up or sending them a little forward to help correct balance before going around the circle again. And so in this case, I halted her. She was pretty good for where she is in her physical journey there, pretty balanced. And she stops and she looks at me and she's like, did I get it? So she's one that really wants to be part of the process. When you're doing these things, it takes her a little bit longer to process, but once she does, it's pretty cool to see what she can do. So I'm going to end on this video, and this was kind of a revolutionary thing for me. I was making some big changes in my life at the time. I knew that I needed to be more present to my family. They really needed me. And so with that change, something else changed. I'm not 100% sure what, but I started getting into connection-based horsemanship and liberty training. And I still very much believe that there is a place for pressure and release, and that it's a very important skill for horses to know, understand, and work off of. I do believe that even liberty and positive reinforcement training still are very much pressure and release, can be just different types. So I'm not discounting any of that. However, it's very easy for us in the horse world to remember the training that we've had where the horse has to do what we tell them to do exactly when we tell them to do it. And as I delved into this liberty work and stretching and body work with my horses and connection, getting to know them better, I started to realize how much the training that we use is not listening to the horse. And now I'm the first one to say that I have so much still to learn. I'm not perfect. A lot of horsemanship is knowing how to control your emotions and respond with empathy, with an appropriate exercise or change direction or some way to help redirect that horse. And so every time we work with a horse, we can learn something new. This day, we had started a new routine, Maggie and I, where she would eat. We have these few little paddocks around this tiny little square pen here, where horses would get moved into to eat so they wouldn't fight with other horses. So she probably has just maybe the baby pony over there who she's pretty attached to that was still eating, waiting to be turned back out, maybe one other one in the paddock to the left. But she would come in this gravel bluestone pen each morning to eat. And so what I started doing was walking her in there, giving her food, and then when I would come back in, I would take the bucket and put it outside, and then she would kind of join up with me, and we would get to work. Well, that day, she did join up with me, and then suddenly, she's maybe taking a lap and a half around the ring at Liberty, and then she walks off and goes and stands in the corner. And my first instinct from my traditional training was, oh, she disconnected, get her back on track, send her forward. But then I noticed something. I don't know what I noticed, and I stopped. And I just knew something was different. I needed to stop and watch. So part of our Liberty stuff was we had been doing a little bit of Liberty work. We'd come to the middle, and then I would do some stretching with her to help release parts of her neck that get really tense, her pole that gets really tense. And she walked in the corner, and I'll just kind of stop talking, and you can see what she did.
A good girl, Maggie. What a good girl. Beautiful. What a good girl. Oh, you want me to scratch your butt again? Okay, got it. Does that feel good?
So she's been an interesting personality to get to know. She's really, really cool. And she has started to tell me she wants to take over when she understands what I'm asking her to do. I've seen this a few more times. And basically, she remembered these are the stretches we do. This is how it feels. I can do these on my own. And that's what she did. She went in the corner and she went through her stretches both sides laterally. Did them very well. Scratched her head. A lot of times if fascia's kind of releasing and changing, they can get a little itchy. So she scratched and shook, and you could see that, it kind of went down into her tail too. She had a little bit of a tail lift swish there. So connecting the spine all the way through, and then reconnected with me. So really cool experience that hit it home that we need to be listening, because our horses are constantly communicating, and it's not simple. It's complex communication, and they want to be heard. And when they're not heard, that's when problems start. That's when they shut down. And eventually, those shut down horses, the ones that crawl inside their bodies to protect themselves and just do what you want them to do, they're good soldiers so that they can avoid any sort of pain. They're eventually going to explode or break. And so it is our job to be watching for those things, to handle our horses appropriately, carefully, watching to help them elongate their bodies, get stronger, find balance, rid of anxiety, all these things to allow our horses to become healthier and happier emotionally, mentally, and physically. So it's our job to improve our communication, to listen, respond appropriately to our horses when they do communicate to us. So hopefully that's helpful. And go out and watch your horses.